Hello, gamers. I talked about Uglies nearly a year ago now, a fact which serves as this unsettling reminder of the impermanence of time. I regret not doing more of a comprehensive review of the series, but truthfully, I didn't have much more to say. This video is going to be a lot more in-depth. Uglies is a YA dystopia, young adult dystopia from 2005, written by Scott Westerfeld, part of a trilogy. There's also a fourth book called Extras, and a far later, tangentially related sequel series called Imposters. YA dystopia has the clearest beginnings around like 1993 with The Giver, but it really came into its own in the early 2000s as this clear subgenre. Uglies is one of the oldest of its kin, but it has plenty in common with the tropes that would become cliché. A girl in constant love triangles winds up taking down an evil government, mostly by accident. The highly thematic dystopia in this instance is one of conformity, where everyone has surgery at 16 to look beautiful and identical. I liked Uglies as a youth, but I did find it frustrating. Like Maximum Ride, it was one of the first series that made me realize books can be bad sometimes. There's a lack of enjoyable characters, the plot is both repetitive and kind of random, and later books add a lot of glorified self-harm. Still, I think the first book of Uglies is alright. It works, and it does so in a way a teen might enjoy while also having easy messaging about beauty standards and environmentalism. I'll go to bat for Uglies, but I wouldn't take a bullet for it. The movie Uglies has sat in production for nearly 2 decades now, and it's a miracle it was ever made. Just one of those bad miracles. It's surprisingly accurate to its source material, which only serves to highlight where the two differ. And basically, I'm gonna go through the movie in order with a focus on that. Uglies as an adaptation, the changes and choices made, and I'll invoke the book where it differs. This is less a film review and more a battle. The use of battle there really isn't a joke. Working on a film review when I've never done one before has been a challenge. Like, I love writing reviews, but I've been especially thankful for the time I spend making art. Finding hobbies you can connect with can be tricky, but that's where today's sponsor, Skillshare, comes in handy. Between digital art, papercraft, and my weird collage-based comic, I probably have enough things to do. But browsing Skillshare always makes me inspired to start something new. There's hundreds of classes on all kinds of creative subjects like paper flower making, embroidery, or 3D modeling, plus plenty of stuff you might not expect like interior design, voice acting, or marketing. Personally, I've been enjoying this class by Denise Love on creating collages from leftover scrap material. Making art is something everyone is capable of, but many people don't think they can do it. I think there's a creative project out there for everyone. It's just hard to know where to begin and what is possible. Skillshare makes that discovery and learning process easy, whether you're a beginner or expert, hobbyist, or professional. The first 500 people who use the link in the description of this video will get a free month-long trial of Skillshare, and the thousands of opportunities that includes. Learn something new, check out my link, and thank you again, Skillshare. Now, let's get back into things. The book begins with the legendary first sentence, "The early summer sky was the color of cat vomit." The Uglies movie begins with a bout of god-awful narration, as all dystopian films must. My story today began in the past. Hundreds of years ago, people became overly reliant on fossil fuels. They squandered Earth's natural resources, and the planet quickly descended into chaos and war. We call those people Rusties. A few of the very best scientists were tasked with salvaging what was left of civilization, and they came up with something revolutionary. A plan for a truly renewable power source. But this didn't solve the world's biggest problem: human nature. People's differences continued to create classes, clans, countries, which prevented them from seeing their shared humanity. So they came up with a radical solution: the transformation. Everyone on their 16th birthday undergoes a life-changing operation to become their most perfect self. And when everyone is perfect, conflict melts away. Everyone is healthy, happy, pretty. But then there are the rest of us, awaiting our operation. Until then, we're less than, ignored. People call us Uglies. The narration is both eye-rollingly cliche and just entirely unnecessary. Within the first 10 minutes, we get two more scenes which primarily serve as setup and exposition and cover the exact same information. I watched Uglies with my flatmate, who hadn't read the book but knows it from me, approximately. We paused during the opening to just dunk on how dumb it was, and we pitched better first scenes. For example, the lead Tally could be looking into a mirror, playing with idealized versions of her face like people play with filters now. Maybe have a flying car go by to establish it's the far future. When we unpaused, we were shocked to see our suggested scene is the first scene of the movie. It works perfectly well too. Some producer at Netflix is just a coward. And that's a surprise to no one. The world of Uglies is straightforward enough. It really doesn't need an opening narration. In the unnamed city of future Seattle, society is divided by age groups and appearance. At 16, everyone undergoes surgery to become a pretty. Before that, you're called an ugly. Uglies are raised to only desire becoming pretty. Their culture encourages everyone to use ugly nicknames like squint or nose or skinny, highlighting things they're insecure about. They live across the river from New Pretty Town, forbidden from visiting but able to see the endless fun that the pretties get up to over there. Their rooms are dominated by huge wall screens where they can meddle with their appearance and save dream looks, something that the book makes clear everyone has been doing since they were like 7. Their culture is constantly reminding them that they are ugly, not good enough, and will always be miserable until they turn 16, because becoming pretty will fix them. The movie doesn't go into it as much, but prettiness is something developed by committee in this world and is a strict set of morphological standards. Even though you can give the surgeons your ideal appearance, they make the call according to hard standards. The idea of pretty is something the society explicitly ties to science, some biological truth of what an ideal human is meant to look like. They teach children that in the past, life was a genetic lottery where most people lost, and the differences in appearance caused endless war and suffering. Making people pretty isn't merely an indulgence to the society, it's considered to be what saved the human race, and thus a must. The flattening of human appearance also includes the elimination of race, something the movie unsurprisingly doesn't engage with. Skin tone, like eye and hair color, is something picked from a limited slider of olive skin tones. Face shape offers even less choice, giving all pretties approximately the same European beauty standard-based appearance. Big eyes, small nose, symmetrical features, high cheekbones. I understand why the film doesn't want to deal with racism when it's barely referenced in the books to begin with. If the Uglies film had included prominent but incidental race changing, the backlash would have been immense. It would just look really bad. Yet the aversion to conflict there does remove something, I think. Like, what is considered beautiful varies by culture, but the colonization and domination of European cultures had led to this homogenous concept of Western beauty standards. And those standards are still very much based on white people. In Uglies, this idea of ideal beauty is now surgically forced, with some people waking up a bit hotter, and others having almost every aspect of their skin, hair, and body altered to fit this one set of standards. Their society claims to have defeated racism, but their pretty solution is a literal whitewash. In the movie, though, the only result of the surgery is waking up a bit hotter, and that's highly subjective. I'm face blind, so I really don't see any difference between most of the before and afters of characters who become pretty in the film, but I really should. In the book, it's repeatedly made clear that the pretties look weird. They're uncannily beautiful, they're uncanny in general. Their eyes are too big, their faces are too symmetrical, and they all look nearly identical. This is likely a hard effect to achieve in live action without looking weird, but people somehow watched Battle Angel Alita. Like, slap a filter on them that isn't just the TikTok bold glamour one. Like, you could even hire different actors to play them post-transformation. One of the most mocked aspects of this film on release was the pretties, and if they looked like gray aliens, it would still be mocked, but it'd have been better. So, the actual plot. Tally Youngblood is a fairly ordinary girl who enjoys light rule breaking and is excited for her 16th birthday, the day she gets to turn pretty. Her best friend Paris is a few months older, and the two make a vow to meet up after his operation. In the book, 16-year-olds just kinda leave, but in the movie, a giant hologram of Governor Dr. Cable holds a special graduation. Unlike racehorses, these kids have varied birthdays, so we can only presume she has to do the ceremony at least once a week. Tally texts Paris often to see how he is after his operation, but he never replies. On the day they're due to meet up, he doesn't show up. She decides to cross the bridge to New Pretty City to look for him. When she finds him, he isn't bothered about missing their meeting and not replying to her texts. He actually just seems a bit confused and dismisses Tally, saying she'll understand when she's pretty. Paris and Tally once made a blood oath to be best friends, something that left matching scars on their palms. But Tally realizes Paris no longer has his. He says he woke up from surgery and just didn't want his anymore, and he no longer calls Tally her ugly nickname of Squint either. It is hammered in repeatedly how different he is. The movie is afraid you'll miss the cues and be confused when it's later revealed that being pretty is a bad thing. Compare this scene to how it goes down in the book. This is Tally speaking first. "Why didn't you write me? I tried, but it just felt bogus. I'm so different now." "But where?" She pointed at her scar. "Take a look, Tally." He held out his own hand. The skin of his palm was smooth and unblemished. It was a hand that said, "I don't have to work very hard, and I'm too clever to have accidents." The scar that they had made together was gone. "They took it away." "Of course they did, Squint. All my skin's new." Tally blinked. She hadn't thought of that. He shook his head. "You're such a kid still." Tally swallowed and closed her hand into a fist. "But they didn't change your blood. We shared that, no matter what." Paris finally looked directly at her face, not flinching as she had feared he would. He smiled beautifully. "No, they didn't. New skin, big deal. And in 3 months we can laugh about this. Unless..." "Unless what?" She looked up into his big brown eyes, so full of concern. "Just promise me you won't do any more stupid tricks," Paris said. "Like coming here. Something that'll get you in trouble. I want to see you pretty." Page 14 from Uglies. Uglies isn't a book swimming with subtlety, but it is a masterpiece compared to the film. Turning pretty is, at first glance, a metaphor for growing up. There's this very successful book/TV show I know of called The Summer I Turned Pretty, and that exists for a reason. That is a certain idea of turning pretty. The divide of ugly to pretty in Uglies is an exaggeration of being a teenager, going through puberty, and the fantasy of winding up so beautiful your time not fitting in is forgotten. It's the fantasy of the ugly duckling in many ways. In the book, Paris rebuffs Tally, not by forgetting who he was, but by seeming to have grown up ahead of her. He talks to her like he started high school and now finds hanging out with middle schoolers to be weird. The movie, though, can't take that. Here's the twist, since it comes late but is obvious enough, so let's just get it out of the way. The operation to become pretty involves altering the patient's brain, giving them a little bit of specialized brain damage to make them compliant, happy, and small-minded. Paris really is different now. He hasn't grown up. That's something you could miss with the book, but just can't in the movie. In Dr. Cable's graduation speech in the film, she even stresses how becoming pretty will make you perfect inside and out. That wouldn't set off alarms. When we see the tanks the pretty operation takes place in, they're these standing room only death traps rather than the book's goo baths. What I'm saying is that the movie dumbed down a book that didn't need it. The majority of people going in understand this is a YA dystopia where the pretty system will turn out to be evil. Yet the movie distrusts the audience so much that many of the notable changes from the source material exist to remove subtlety from, again, an unsubtle book. After confronting Paris, Tally's face is scanned by a security robot and alarms ring out. She flees back to Uglyville, where she runs into her classmate Shay out hoverboarding. Shay helps her escape, and the two chat, realizing they have a lot in common, including a birthday. Shay and Tally have immediate chemistry, and I was hoping one big change would be making them actually a couple. I mentioned this in my book review, which is not required to pay attention to this, but Shay and Tally's relationship has always been the core of the Uglies series, and the books are really bad at actually acknowledging that core. And so when I was thinking about the movie and my ideal, I was like, maybe they'll finally just improve all of that, make them a couple. No, alas. Shay and Tally grow closer over several months, going out hoverboarding and pulling tricks, which are sort of just light rule breaking. Uglies is, at its core, a book series about characters hoverboarding through the wilderness, and I'm glad this wasn't neglected. I always hated reading the hoverboarding sections, but watching this movie, I remember very early on I turned to my flatmate and I said, if 40% of this movie is a boring hoverboard action scenes, it's not a goddamn movie adaptation of Uglies. And I guess by that standard it wasn't, but I was just worried hoverboarding would be cut for being expensive and silly. The girls break the rules often, and you might be wondering about that. It was a big sticking point for my flatmate who doesn't have familiarity with the series. Like, Tally's face is clearly scanned at Paris's party, but she faces no consequences. The girls sneak out, they go out of bounds, they hack things, they steal all the time, and nothing happens. At the same time, Tally repeatedly reiterates that she's worried they'll be caught, and she will be denied her pretty operation. Do they punish rule breakers here, or not? Like, there's an answer in the books, once vaguely alluded to in the movie, that the government allows rule breakers because they make the best candidates for advanced positions and special agents. Okay, but without that knowledge, it just feels like this big plot hole. As their 16th birthday comes close, Shay reveals that she doesn't actually want the surgery, much to Tally's shock. Shay instead wants to run away and join the Smoke, a community in the wilderness. She takes Tally out to some ruins to contact the Smoke's recruiter, a teenage boy named David, and asks Tally to come with her. Tally doesn't, and Shay leaves her some special instructions in a code only she will understand, and then leaves. It's once more a conflict. The movie is not only simplified, but signposted. Like, Tally literally exclaims, I don't want to be free. I want to be pretty.
You're free. I don't want to be free. I want to be pretty.
Here's a parallel section from the book, which is basically the same conversation. Shay is speaking first. I don't want to be pretty. Tally sighed. This again. I'm sick of the city, Shay continued. I'm sick of the rules and boundaries. The last thing I want is to become some empty-headed new pretty having one big party all day. Come on, Shay, they do all the same stuff we do. Bungee jump, fly, play with fireworks, only they don't have to sneak around. They don't have the imagination to sneak around. Look, Skinny, I'm with you, Tally said sharply. Doing tricks is great, okay? Breaking the rules is fun. But eventually, you've got to do something besides being a clever little ugly. Like being a vapid, boring pretty? No, like being an adult. Do you ever think that when you're pretty, you might not need to play tricks and mess things up? Maybe just being ugly is why uglies always fight and pick on each other, because they aren't happy with who they are. Well, I want to be happy, and looking like a real person is the first step. I'm not afraid of looking the way I do, Tally. Maybe not, but you're afraid of growing up. Shay didn't say anything. Tally floated in silence, looking up at the sky, barely able to see the clouds through her anger. She wanted to be pretty, wanted to see Paris again. It seemed like forever since she'd talked to him or anyone else besides Shay. She was sick of this whole ugly business and just wanted it to end. Page 49. One of the biggest strengths of the first Uglies book is that Shay and Tally are opposites, so like foils. Shay doesn't want the operation and is cautiously expressing the daring view that the system sucks. Tally loves the system. She accepts Shay, but she doesn't believe her. The movie lacks this conviction, perhaps nervous to have a protagonist who firmly believes in the wrong message, even if the whole point of the plot is her unlearning it. In the book, Paris and Tally cut their palms to mark them as BFFs. In the film, Tally is obsessing over her future pretty self, Paris interrupts, and they vow to always be enough for each other. Suddenly, Tally is less an everyday girl brainwashed by the oppressive system, long before it ever gives her brain damage. She's a girl who wants to fit in, but secretly suspects she lives in a dystopia. She's a smidge more redeemable, even though she shouldn't have to be. After Shay runs away, Tally is taken in by the government's Special Circumstances Department, of which Dr. Cable is the head. They want to find the Smoke and deny Tally's pretty operation unless she agrees to help. She refuses because of her friendship with Shay. Dr. Cable then sends Paris to visit and convince her with the claim that Shay is in danger and the smoke has a city-destroying weapon. Tally is now convinced, and she's given a heart-shaped locket with a secret tracking device for her to activate when she's there. For some reason, she wears this locket prominently around her neck over her clothes the entire time. And here is Tally's infamous hoverboard trek across America. It's only like 6 chapters in the book, but I just talk about it so much because every book in the trilogy has a section like this, where it's just someone hoverboarding lost and alone in the wilderness. We do see Tally eat spag ball, to the delight of fans, but the running joke of it being the only thing she had to eat for days is missing. It's just kind of like a shout out to fans. Her 3-minute montage is capped with one of the most notable diversions from the source material, as Dr. Cable sits Paris down and decides to turn him into a super soldier called a Special. Paris is a fairly unimportant character to the series overall. He's just sort of an airhead that Tally moves on from, and the change here is one I'd call purely Hollywood, regardless of if this is a Hollywood film. It's more dramatic if he shows up chasing Tally in the climax, so he does. The choice to turn the operation from an intensive nanotechnology goo bath where your whole body is melted and remade into some sort of standing glass box of agony continues to be really, really silly. You can't do invasive surgery on someone who is standing up. How does anyone in this universe walk into the Pretty Transformation office and not immediately realize something evil is going on? Why does Cable have 3 of these things in her office anyway? Meanwhile, Tally wakes up in a field of burning flowers. They're being burned on purpose by the smoke. The fact that this secret rebel community is impossible to find for anybody, despite the fact they constantly set fires to acres of flowers, is astonishing. These flowers are another major point of change, one that I find curious. They're introduced in that wretched opening narration as special flowers which provide a clean, infinite energy source and help to save the world. Environmentalism is the other theme of Uglies, but you wouldn't know that from the film. It engages with the theme only from the perspective of, it's bad when the Earth is destroyed. Any greater nuance is missing. Like these flowers, in the film, they're supposedly energy for the city, but revealed to be toxic, sucking up nutrients from the soil and leaving a wasteland behind, and giving people no choice but to live in the city. In the book, they're beautiful flowers Tally is unfamiliar with, but she soon learns why the forest rangers who deliver her to the smoke burn them. They're an invasive monoculture that resulted from mankind's hubris. Speaking first is a forest ranger. This flower used to be one of the rarest plants in the world, a white tiger orchard. In rusty days, a single bulb was worth more than a house. A house? But there's zillions of them. You noticed? He held up the flower, staring into its delicate mouth. About 300 years ago, some Rusty figured a way to engineer the species to adapt to wider conditions. She messed with the genes to make them propagate more easily. Why? The usual. To trade them for lots of stuff. But she succeeded a little too well. One of the most beautiful plants in the world, but too successful. They turned into the ultimate weed, what we call a monoculture. They crowd out every other species, choke trees and grass, and nothing eats them except one species of hummingbird, which feeds on their nectar. But the hummingbirds nest in trees. There aren't any trees down there, Tally said. Just the orchards. Exactly. That's what a monoculture means. Everything the same. After enough orchards build up in an area, there aren't enough hummingbirds to pollinate them. To spread the seeds. And you've been doing this for almost 300 years. The Rusties started the job after they figured out what they'd done, but we'll never win. All we can do is hope to contain the weed. Page 102 of Uglies. I don't hate the idea in the movie of the city adopting the flowers as part of their lie. All of the city is based on the principle of a beautiful lie. That's what pretties are, and that's also what the flower represents in both cases. Destructive conformity disguised as something harmlessly attractive. But I think there's a major loss in the movie making the flowers toxic and an intentional part of how cities keep people from leaving. It's once more simplifying something that isn't complex, so it can better fit hard moral standards of good and evil. The flowers are bad in either version, but the movie ties their damage to the current evil dystopia. The book makes it clear that this has been going on for generations and civilizations. The movie makes them toxic and evil. The book explains how a healthy ecosystem requires diversity. Like, the metaphor still works, but it's worse. Like, plainly, it is worse. Tally meets David in the burning flower field and is taken to a smoke outpost where she reunites with Shay. People are suspicious Tally made the 4-day trek on her own, but Shay vouches for her. When they catch up, Shay notices the huge, obvious heart-shaped necklace tracker around Tally's neck and asks about it, which Tally awkwardly shakes off. They arrive at the smoke proper, a place that looks more like a lovely campground than a working commune. There are several large changes made regarding the smoke, including two cut aspects which again highlight the movie's weaker messaging. First, the environment. A large reason Tally is uncomfortable with even the idea of the smoke is because of the propaganda she's been told about human history. Because humans in the past took too much from the earth and caused the apocalypse, Tally believes any destruction of nature is a repetition of those sins. That belief is a large part of what keeps humans confined to dystopian cities. Since humanity wrecked the environment once and it was horrible, humans shouldn't interact with nature at all. The city has everything people need: endless, clean, free food and water, and recyclable resources which can be printed on demand in every bedroom. This is a post-scarcity world. It's a utopia better than nature. Which is good, the city says, because humans can't be trusted with nature. In the smoke, Tally is exposed to tree cutting and she's horrified, but she's also exposed to tree planting. She starts to see things differently. Similarly, another cut aspect is the smoke's library. In the book, this place is run by an older man, and that alone is notable. He's 40 and is hideous to Tally. He keeps a special collection of ancient magazines where Tally's ideas of beauty get further challenged. She and Shay leaf through old tabloids from our era and are shocked to see the differences in beauty standards. Tally's eyes widened as Shay turned the pages, pointing and giggling. She'd never seen so many different faces before. Mouths and eyes and noses of every imaginable shape, all combined insanely on people of every age. And the bodies. Some were grotesquely fat, or weirdly over-muscled, or uncomfortably thin, and almost all of them had wrong, ugly proportions. But instead of being ashamed of their deformities, the people were laughing and kissing and posing, as if all the pictures had been taken at some huge party. Who are these freaks? They aren't freaks, Shay said. The weird thing is, these are famous people. Page 138. Both of these cuts are things which are key to Tally's worldview being challenged, but they've been removed. Instead, we get a few added scenes of Tally poking around the smoke suspiciously, David being shirtless, and David teaching Tally to use a crossbow in a scene which only exists to set up a very silly action scene that they add later. Things at the smoke move quickly, never really fleshing the place out in a way that makes sense. Tally begins to enjoy herself, but as my flatmate pointed out, in the movie the turning point is having a party and dancing, which is exactly what Tally has always wanted to do. She just needed some friends. It has nothing to do with her appreciating a new way of life or really rejecting what she's been taught. She's just vibing. David inexplicably likes Tally and gives her a pair of handmade gloves. In the book, it's clear that Shay has a crush on David, and the importance of the gloves being handmade is well contrasted to the plastic-based, one-use clothes that exist in the city. In the film, neither point is really clear, so Shay just becomes really angry at Tally next to this river in a way that feels out of nowhere. And also, I know it's a real river, but it looks incredibly like a green screen in this one shot. It's a week or two in the smoke. It's just been a bit. David takes Tally to meet his parents, who live far away from the main community despite founding it. They were former surgeons alongside Dr. Cable, who discovered the brain lesions that the operation gives pretties. When they looked into ways to reverse it, they had to flee to the wilderness, but they're still developing a cure out here somehow. When Tally asks why the lesions exist, David's father says that they're so Dr. Cable can control people. That's true, but I think the movie misses a point of deeper nuance once again. As evil as the pretty operation is, the people who enforce it generally believe it is a net good. It is being done to control people, yes, but from the villain's perspective, it is being done to save the world.
That's when we knew the lesions were not a side effect of the surgery, they were the purpose.
But why? Why'd Cable do that?
To control us.
If we only look at dystopia from the perspective of what if a bad guy made a bad system that was bad, wouldn't that be crazy? We kind of lose sight of the purpose of dystopia as social commentary. After the near total devastation of the Earth, the surviving scientists got together to find a way from preventing that from happening again. Their conclusion was that it was impossible. Humans will always find differences and reasons for conflict. Thus, the differences had to be erased, and so too the capacity for conflict. The pretty system has existed for generations. It's been at least 300 years since the apocalypse in the books. And yeah, you can't deny that it works, kind of. Thousands of people live long, happy, healthy, peaceful lives with their every need cared for in a post-scarcity, post-capitalist utopia. It's just that this perfect world can only exist with extreme control and specialized brain damage. The pretty system is an extreme solution born primarily from the idea that humans are too stupid to learn to be better. The system infantilizes the people in it, from the cutesy life stages of littlies, uglies, pretties, and crumblies, to the propaganda which emphasizes the past as something unimportant beyond having been solved. The problem with it isn't solely about body image or the environment, it's also about a lack of faith in humanity. There are definitely people today who think of humanity as a broad collective of idiots who can't be trusted to make good choices. There's people who think of prejudice and discrimination as innate to human nature, and thus impossible to ever be rid of. It's understandable to look at human history and get cynical about how things have shaken out at times, but humans are humans. We're all products of culture, time, and a million other factors, and we're good at learning. When the movie says the brain lesions exist because Dr. Cable wants to control people, it once again is flattening the meaning and relevance of its world building. After learning about the lesions, Tally throws her heart-shaped tracker into the fire. She tells David she's been a bad person and not entirely honest, but they comfort her and they kiss. The David romance, to me, has always felt like this intrusion into the world of Uglies. It pries Shay and Tally apart, it happens quickly, and it's just so uninteresting. Like, I have no idea what David sees in her. It turns out, though, that throwing the tracker in the fire set off an emergency signal, and the next morning, Tally and David wake up to the sound of special circumstances arriving at the smoke. Oops! Chaos overtakes the camp. Specials are meant to be secret agents with enhanced speed, reflexes, and strength. So of course we're treated to plenty of footage of them running about at normal speed. Their suits this garish blue LED that just stands out everywhere. Tally and David return to the smoke to see everyone has been captured and Dr. Cable has arrived. With her are David's parents, and far more importantly, a couple of shirtless hunks. They're never addressed or focused on, and that makes them my favorite part of the movie. Who are these two ripped men? Did they lose their shirts while trying to capture David's parents? They're almost certainly meant to be specials, especially because their geometric tattoos look vaguely similar to the bodysuits that specials wear. We only see the hunks for a brief, blessed few shots. Most of the scene after is composed of tight close-ups and careful, hunkless angles, as if they're desperate to pretend the mystery men aren't real. Dr. Cable demands the location of David, whom she calls the leader of this rebellion. And yeah, weirdly that is true. David's parents formed the Smoke, but the Smoke isn't a rebellion, it really is more of a commune. David has only recently begun recruiting directly from Tally's city. He's like 18 at the oldest. The Smoke has existed for decades ahead of time, or back then, and it's his fault that Dr. Cable has gone so uppity about finally destroying the place. When the parents refuse to say anything about David's location, Cable instructs the now special Paris to kill David's father. The moment his neck is snapped is one of the few times we get a close look at one of the hunks. The father's death happens in vastly different circumstances in the book. If you can recall, Dr. Cable is a woman who is all about surgery and mind control. Originally, she kidnaps both parents, and the father dies in an experimental attempt at erasing his memories. It's a later book revelation that pretty brainwashing isn't effective against painful memories and trauma, and judging by the full-throated wailing from the movie murder audience, these Smoke kids just became poor candidates for brainwashing. Like, the neck snap by Paris is way more dramatic, but the lab rat death makes so much more sense. David and Tally burst out of their hiding spot and just sort of immediately collapse on the ground at Dr. Cable's feet. Tally confronts Dr. Cable, saying she didn't know anyone would be hurt. Her yelling makes it immediately obvious to everyone she was a traitor, another change from the book which I believe is meant to make her more sympathetic. The book has her hide among captives until the specials single her out. And I'll say it again, as much as I dislike Tally as a protagonist throughout the entire series, the movie's efforts to make her a better person just feel contrary to her journey as a character the entire time. The smoke is in a state of disrepair as voices call Tally a traitor. She suddenly darts away from Dr. Cable, running off with a mission to make that extraneous crossbow scene pay off in the stupidest way possible. As she flees, we can clearly see that there's at least 3 specials and 2 hunks standing nearby, and they don't react at all. Tally stumbles into a cabin, and it takes 10 seconds for a special to chase after her, running slowly and slamming weakly against the old wooden door. It takes him a further while to break down the door, at which point Tally has already upended a gas container, grabbed a crossbow, set off an explosion, and then combat rolls away. She then shoots a special with the bow and leaves. It's this insane sequence which serves no purpose as an addition, makes the specials seem even less impressive, and paints Tally as a Katniss-style action hero when she simply isn't. David was able to escape when the explosion went off, and is last seen exiting, pursued by Hunk. Tally and David meet up again in a cave, where he confronts her about the betrayal. She talks about growing to love the smoke, and once more the movie feels the need to lay the messaging at the viewer's feet.
I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I fell in love with this place.
I never knew there was a way you could live and be special, and that would be enough, or that the cost of becoming pretty was your mind. Anytime the film wants to make a point about beauty, it lapses into this vague body-positive messaging that never quite feels right to the actual setting of Uglies, in my opinion. Tally talks about learning to be herself in the smoke like she's been at a summer camp for girls with low self-esteem. I think the message wants to be, it's okay to be yourself, you are enough, reject beauty standards. And this is a nice sentiment, but it's a poor point in the face of a dystopia. In the book, Tally never learns to really love herself or see herself as beautiful. She's never really able to get rid of her insecurities, only to make progress. The point of Uglies never felt like it was about self-acceptance, because self-acceptance kind of begins and ends at the self. And the problem is the system. It's the idea being held up and enforced by society that beauty is an objective truth. It's really hard to love your body and find it beautiful and to unlearn everything which makes it so difficult. I personally think it's easier to start elsewhere. Begin by dismantling the idea that there's such a thing as a wrong body, and then circle back to yourself later. I have a unique relationship with beauty. I'm an outlier, and we'll get into that, because I'm face blind as well as asexual. So not only am I not attracted to people in general, I lack the capacity to fully parse what they look like. I sometimes feel like an alien in the face of beauty trends and mainstream dating culture. Like, I struggle to understand things like, how can appearance matter more than personality? Like, why does the height of someone matter at all? Like, no one is ugly when they laugh. Everyone's so much lovelier when you befriend them. But growing up, I had plenty of body image issues despite a lack of recognition for what beauty was exactly meant to be. I only knew I wasn't it. I don't know when I stopped thinking about my appearance in the negatives, only that it wasn't really an internal process. Like, I didn't like how I looked, but I would never let someone else call themselves ugly. I didn't like how I looked, but I also knew that beauty standards changed and were just this bullshit. I didn't like how I looked, but I also knew how much appearance didn't really matter when it came to friendships. At a certain point, the ideas of beauty I chose to apply to others became internalized. And I like how I look now. I look like me, and that's really the only standard that matters to me. Everyone's different, and that's okay. Like, I am very much an outlier. Probably a lot of people start on the path of body positivity by accepting themselves first. I only question it in Uglies, where the focus on internal acceptance rather than external change feels counter to the point of the dystopian world that Tally lives in. David and Tally head out to rescue everyone Dr. Cable captured from the smoke. They hire some uglies to cause a distraction and easily sneak into special circumstances. This top secret base of super soldiers and experimental science has like one guard on duty and no cameras. They free the prisoners, but learn Shay has already been taken in for surgery. They find the now pretty Shay with Dr. Cable, and Paris arrives a moment later. Dr. Cable forces Tally, David, and David's mother into surgery boxes and lectures them about how free thinking is a cancer. The glass cases of medical malpractice continue to be incredibly dumb, and I won't stop pointing that out. The film shows 4 tools involved: pliers, a surgical saw, and 2 lobotomy ice picks? That and, of course, the mysterious fog, which appears to serve no purpose but a sense of malaise. Before anything of consequence happens, the triple surgery is interrupted by a guy from the smoke in a helicopter with a flamethrower. It's the same one they burned the flowers with, but how it snuck into the city to hover next to special circumstances without being shot down is a mystery. The heroes and Shay are able to escape and make it to the roof, where Paris is waiting. Tally tries to talk him out of his brainwashing, but David interrupts out of fear for Tally's life. Paris winds up dangling off a ledge and falls after calling Tally her old ugly nickname. He's almost certainly alive, but I don't think we're going to get a sequel. They flee the city. David's mom has what she needs to finalize the pretty cure, but there's no guarantee it'll work. Shay is an obvious test subject, but David's mother, and I guess I'm going to start calling her Maddie. I was trying to avoid giving too many names, but we're going to talk about her a lot. Maddie refuses on the front of ethics. She's not going to perform an experiment on an unwilling subject or someone who can't properly consent. I understand the Hippocratic Oath, as she specifically invokes in the book, but how else are you going to test this? It has to be used on a pretty, and no pretty will consent because of, the brainwashing that the cure exists to fix. Shay rejects the cure now, but everyone in this conversation knew Shay before she turned pretty. They knew she never wanted this and would 100% want to be cured. Yet her saying no now is held up, even though her ability to say yes was removed from her without her consent, like an hour ago. Technically, this is good consent practice. A yes once does not mean a yes later, but it's just incredibly dumb in these particular circumstances. Thus, Tally decides to volunteer. She offers to turn herself in, become pretty, and have the cure be tested on her. David worries they'll lose her like we lost Shay, to which Tally says that she is strong, unlike Shay, and also that she knows who she is now and won't let them take that away. Unlike Shay? It's a couple brutal dunks on your best friend there, Tally, and a whole lot of hubris. She also promises to leave a sign, so they know that she's still herself. That's fantastically vague. In the book, David doesn't know that Tally betrayed the smoke until this point, and her volunteering to become a pretty is part of her guilt over it and Shay's transformation. He leaves in anger at this point. Tally has no self-confidence she'll be okay. She doesn't think of herself as strong or exceptional. She only knows that they need a test subject and she's willing to be a sacrifice. The movie is desperate to make her more of a conventional YA dystopia protagonist, even though she already is one. She's just not a self-assured action hero who loves herself. She's a miserable teen girl who hates herself and is beginning to realize how much hurt she's caused. In the book, Tally also writes a letter of consent, and it's mind-boggling that this isn't in the film, because it's the only reason the consent loophole works. Pretty Tally, like Pretty Shay, will almost certainly reject the idea of being cured. She does in the book. Only a letter from herself, specifying explicit consent despite future circumstances, would hold up to the ethical requirements that Maddie laid out. But yeah, cut. As the film comes to an end, the smoke leaves Tally and Shay to be picked up, and we end with a glimpse of the now pretty Tally. She still has the scar on her hand. Why the hell would they ever let her keep that? Like most books from the time, Uglies was supposed to be a movie over a decade ago, and the fact that it ever climbed out of production hell is astonishing. Watching the movie is a flashback to 2014 and the glorious golden age of YA dystopian films. From the grey loser uniforms the Uglies wear to the big bad's evil leader-cheek white outfits. The movie feels like a relic of another era, and in some ways it is. The thing about Uglies the book and Uglies the movie is that the movie is honestly a faithful adaptation. That isn't necessarily a good thing, because as said, Uglies itself is flawed, and from 2005. The commentary on body image and beauty standards is more relevant than ever with the advent of TikTok. Like, teenagers have long faced pressure about looking pretty, but it's far worse now that we live in an algorithm-driven capitalist hellscape where influencers can sell 30-step skincare routines to tweens who think they need them, and plastic surgeons peddle their trade without end and lots of silly dances. None of that stuff is new, really, nor are filters and Photoshop, but the culture around it feels worse. There's good money to be made in insecurity. The movie is bad, but there is something not bad about it in terms of an adaptation. It's frustratingly loyal to the source, with almost every scene and plot point transferred to the big screen. I appreciate that loyalty, but Uglies is one of the few cases where I believe updating aspects of the world building or plot would have been a good thing. The conversation about these subjects has evolved and changed, but the Uglies movie doesn't really reflect that. As a result, the film feels stuck in the past and irrelevant to the present, despite being set in the future. Much of that clunk, though, is, again, inherited. Yet every time it changed something, the film made it worse. Themes are lost, messaging reduced, and it all feels like something the target audience wouldn't be able to connect with. Tally is one of the least like YA protagonists I know, even among fans of the books. But there is something charming about that. This is a story about ugliness and imperfection, and Tally is a teen girl over her head who makes almost constant mistakes. It's relatable. Yet some of the most blatant changes for the film were clearly made to better her. She's an action hero who can pull off explosive crossbow maneuvers. Her scar isn't from a childhood BFF blood pact. It's a reminder to be enough and resist beauty standards. Paris chooses to lose his scar, but Pretty Tally is strong enough to keep it. Pretty Shay is lost, but Tally is certain she'll be stronger. None of this is particularly exceptional for YA, but all of it softens what makes Tally interesting. There's been a discussion over the last few years about fiction and morality, and a feeling that stories have been dumbing down issues in favor of clean, unproblematic choices. When Netflix did their Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation this year, many of the critiqued aspects was how it flattened characters' arcs, especially ones where the character was in the wrong. A teen boy with sexist beliefs he had to unlearn now is fine and has nothing to learn at all. A girl who finds herself at odds with sexism ingrained in her culture is now instantly successful. The child who will save the world, he got stuck in an iceberg for 100 years because he chose to run away. In the Netflix version, it's an accident. There's many more examples in the Avatar show, and I just can't help but draw parallels between the two, especially as they're both adaptations put out by Netflix this year. I don't believe this is a widespread death of society kind of issue. Good media is still being made. But there is something weird going on in the mainstream YA market. Is the fear someone might stop watching before that flaw's fixed and write off the content as problematic? Is it to make characters more likable in some way, especially to a general audience? Is it simpler because they assume we're not paying attention? I don't have an answer, and like most things, it's almost certainly a mix of factors. I don't think society is getting dumber and begging for black and white morality plays. I think some marketing team has decided this is profitable. Uglies of all things being subjected to moral flattening like this, though, is ironic, because if you recall, infantilization is a core aspect of how the dystopia maintains power. The culture of Tally's city is one of simplified morality. Humans hurt the environment in the past, so humans should not live in nature. Humans fought over differences, so those differences were erased. The past was bad, but everything is good now. The people who formed the society thought the general population was too stupid to be trusted with nuance. The people who made this movie evidently felt the same. It's not like Uglies is a masterwork of moral philosophy, but it's a book with themes which has been turned into a movie without any. It follows the source material with admirable loyalty, which only makes the toothless changes stand out more. It's a bad movie if you aren't a fan of the books, and it's a bad movie if you are. It's a good adaptation, and a poor one. It's something which belongs a decade in the past, but has been sanitized for the present. I think there's better ways to spend 100 minutes, is what I'm saying.